Those words in John chapter 20 are powerful words. They're, they're words which we can fully and wholeheartedly resonate with, especially this Easter season. Perhaps as never before. But the story doesn't end there. This is a BC story, before COVID. And it's an AD story, after desolation and after disease. And we know it. It's powerful. It's hopeful. It's joyful. It's life-giving. We call it Easter. But it really is about returning to life. And all its wonder and all its joy and its fulfillment. When the tears are wiped away. And life in all of its fullness and all of its richness, in all of its joy and in all of its anticipation and in all of its hope begins again. Begins again, maybe and perhaps and hopefully as never before. We call it resurrection. And we celebrate it on Easter. Easter happens. Resurrection happens. New life happens. Even if our church buildings are sitting empty. Because Christ is risen. And you can join me in saying those words. He is risen indeed. Hope lives. Today, I would encourage you, indeed I would even go as far to say that I would challenge you to reflect upon the experiences, the resurrection stories in your life in the past 3 or 4 weeks. I want to share a few of mine. Maybe as a bit of incentive to you. A week and a half ago, my phone rang as I was preparing to barbecue my dinner. It was a good friend calling from Toronto. And I knew as soon as I heard his voice that something was wrong. He informed me that he had found his wife comatose in the bathroom. And so he immediately called 911 and they came and they rushed her to hospital. They took all the necessary procedures, thinking that it could well be COVID-19. But it was not related to COVID. It was an infection from a recent surgery. 2 days later, a mutual friend sent me a text saying that Jeanette had left the hospital and returned home. Resurrection happens. I know John Hannigan, our friend, and a fellow member of our congregation has experienced the same as Janice has now left the hospital and gone to a convalescent home. And we rejoice in that. A couple of weeks ago, I had a loud banging on my front door. I went to the door and there was a lady from our local exercise group that meets at the community center across the road. She was standing a cow's distance away. I say a cow's distance because recently in a photo online, I noticed that that's how far you're supposed to stand from each other. That means something to us here. I can look out my window and see cows grazing in the pasture, but I'm not sure it means a whole lot to people in Toronto. Anyhow, she was standing the appropriate distance away, and she said to me, I hadn't seen your car move for a few days, so I thought I'd come by and just make sure you're okay. Resurrection, life, community happens. On my grandson Malcolm's birthday this past Thursday, on a FaceTime, and thank goodness for FaceTime these days, or Skype, or whatever you use, he joyfully showed me his hockey cards, including one of Patrick Waugh with my beloved Habs. The joy of a young boy sharing with his grandfather on FaceTime, a grandfather who is worried about what the future holds for him and his brother and his sister. Resurrection happens. I could go on. I could tell you about the 40-minute phone call I had with a good friend from university days that I hadn't talked to in 40 years. But I want to tell you about a resurrection story, a good news story, a gospel story that a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, and a former colleague in ministry told me just yesterday. Financial donations to the food bank and food banks across Ontario and across the country are up by an unprecedented 68%, meeting 92% of their needed budget before government subsidies. Wow. Resurrection happens. Can you name it? In your life experience today, this week, Jesus lives. Jesus lives indeed. This Easter, let us claim as never before the world-altering, life-changing truth. Christ our Lord is risen. And may the response come from each of you and from homes all over the world. He is risen indeed.